Welcome to Grandma's Diary. Please subscribe and let's dive in. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped under my apartment door like an afterthought. I remember staring at it for what felt like an eternity. The elegant cream-colored cardstock, the embossed gold lettering, the formal script announcing the wedding of my son, Marcus Wellington, to Miss Vanessa Hartley. My hands trembled as I opened it, not from excitement, but from something I couldn't quite name. Hope perhaps, or maybe just the desperate wish that after 3 years of silence, my son had finally remembered he had a mother. Inside, tucked behind the main invitation, was a small note card. No warm greeting. No dear mom. Just a few typed lines. You're invited to attend. Your seat has been assigned. Table 42, near the service entrance. Please dress appropriately and arrive on time. Table 42. Near the service entrance. I sat down heavily on my worn sofa, the invitation clutched in my arthritic fingers. After everything I'd sacrificed, every sleepless night I'd worked double shifts at the hospital, every penny I'd saved and given to make Marcus's dreams come true, this was how I was being welcomed back into his life. Not as his mother. Not even as an honored guest. But as an embarrassment to be hidden away where his new society friends wouldn't have to see me. My name is Margaret Wellington. I'm 73 years old, and this is the story of how my family tried to destroy me, and how I fought back to reclaim everything they thought they could take. To understand what happened at that wedding, you need to know who I was before my world came crashing down. 45 years ago, I was Margaret Price, a young nurse with dreams as bright as the morning sun. I'd worked my way through nursing school on scholarships and weekend jobs, graduating at the top of my class. My parents had been poor. Daddy worked in the steel mills and Mama cleaned houses, but they'd instilled in me an unshakable belief that education and hard work could open any door. Then I met Robert Wellington. Oh, Robert. He was everything a 25-year-old girl could dream of. Handsome, charming, ambitious. He worked in finance, wore expensive suits, and had a smile that could light up a room. More importantly, he seemed to see something special in me, the girl from the wrong side of town with calloused hands and simple dreams. We married 6 months after we met, in a small ceremony at the courthouse. His family didn't attend. They made their disapproval clear. Robert was marrying beneath his station, they said. I wasn't cultured enough, educated enough, sophisticated enough for a Wellington. But Robert swore he didn't care. He loved me, he said, and that was all that mattered. For a while it really was. We moved into a modest apartment, and I continued working as a nurse while Robert climbed the corporate ladder. 2 years later Marcus was born, followed 3 years after that by his sister, Catherine. I remember holding each of them for the first time, feeling their tiny hearts beating against mine, and making a silent vow that I would give them everything I never had. But life has a way of testing our vows. When Marcus was 7 and Catherine was 4, Robert's investment firm collapsed in scandal. He hadn't been directly involved in the fraud, but the taint was enough to destroy his career. For months he sent out resumes to no response. Our savings dwindled. Bills piled up. And slowly, the man I'd married began to disappear, replaced by someone bitter and broken. He started drinking. First just a glass or 2 of wine with dinner, then bottles. Then harder things. The charming smile faded. The ambition died. And eventually Robert stopped trying altogether. I became the sole breadwinner. I took every extra shift the hospital offered. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. Anytime they needed someone, I was there. On my days off, I cleaned houses just like my mother had done, swallowing my pride because my children needed food and clothes and a roof over their heads. Robert's family, the Wellingtons with their old money and older prejudices, cut us off completely. We weren't worthy of the family name anymore, they said. We were an embarrassment. They wanted nothing to do with us, and especially nothing to do with me. The woman they'd always known would drag their golden boy down. So I did it alone. I packed Marcus's lunches with love notes tucked inside. I helped Catherine with her homework at midnight after my shift ended. I sewed their Halloween costumes and baked birthday cakes from scratch because store-bought was too expensive. I showed up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, no matter how exhausted I was. And when Robert finally drank himself to death when Marcus was 15 and Catherine was 12, I held my children close and promised them that everything would be okay. That I would make sure they had opportunities one never did. That they would go to the best schools, have the best chances, become anything they wanted to be. Kept that promise. Took out loans. I worked 70-80-hour weeks. I sold my mother's jewelry, the only thing of value I owned. I went without so they wouldn't have to. When Marcus got accepted to Harvard, I found a way to pay for it. When Catherine wanted to study art in Paris, I made it happen. I gave them everything. And I thought, God, how foolish I was. I thought they loved me for it. The first crack appeared on Marcus's graduation day. He just received his MBA, and I'd used the last of my savings to fly to Boston for the ceremony. I was so proud I could barely contain it. My son, my beautiful, brilliant boy, graduating from Harvard Business School. Everything I'd sacrificed had been worth it. But when I arrived at his apartment to surprise him before the ceremony, I found him with his grandmother, Robert's mother, Victoria Wellington. I hadn't seen Victoria in over a decade. She was older now, her hair completely white, but she still had that same look of cold disdain she'd always reserved for me. And there she was, sitting in my son's living room like she belonged there, like she had any right to be part of this moment. "Mom!" Marcus looked shocked to see me. "Not happy." "I wasn't expecting you until later. I wanted to surprise you, sweetheart." I moved to hug him, but he stepped back slightly, his eyes darting to Victoria. "Margaret!" Victoria's voice could have frozen water. "How unexpected. I'm his mother, Victoria. Where else would I be?" Something passed between Marcus and his grandmother then. Some unspoken communication I couldn't quite read. Victoria stood, smoothing her expensive designer dress. "Marcus, darling, we should discuss those matters we talked about. Perhaps over lunch. The club is expecting us." "Actually, grandmother, I was planning to take Mom to." "Your mother will understand that this is business, won't you, Margaret?" Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife. "Important family business." Family business. The word stung because I knew what they meant. Wellington family business. The family that had rejected us, rejected me, suddenly wanted back in now that Marcus was successful. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry, but this is kind of important. Why don't we meet up after the ceremony? I'll introduce you to some people." I should have seen it then. Should have recognized the signs. But I was too blinded by love. Too desperate to believe my son would never choose the family that had abandoned us over the mother who had given him everything. I attended the graduation ceremony alone, sitting in the crowd of strangers while Victoria Wellington sat in the reserved family section. And at the reception afterward, when I finally found Marcus, he was surrounded by his grandmother's society friends, laughing and networking, playing the part of a Wellington heir. "Marcus, sweetheart, could we take a photo together?" asked, camera in hand. He glanced at the people around him, then back at me, and something in his expression made my heart sink. "Sure, Mom. But maybe just a quick one. I need to talk to some people here." We took the photo, me beaming with pride, him looking slightly uncomfortable, and then he excused himself. I didn't see him again for the rest of the evening. I flew home the next day, telling myself it was just nerves. Just the excitement of graduation. He'd call soon. We'd laugh about it. He didn't call. Catherine did, though, 2 weeks later. She just finished her art degree in Paris and was full of exciting news. She'd been offered a position at a prestigious gallery in New York. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. I'm moving to New York next month, and I'm going to need a place to stay while I look for an apartment. I was wondering." "Of course you can stay with me," I said immediately. "You know you're always welcome." There was a pause. "Actually, Mom, I was thinking maybe you could help me with the deposit on a place. Nothing fancy, just something in a decent neighborhood. You know how expensive New York is." My heart sank. I just paid off the last of the loans I'd taken out for their education. My savings account was nearly empty. I was 70 years old, working reduced hours because my body couldn't handle the long shifts anymore. Catherine, honey, I don't have. It's fine, she cut me off, her voice suddenly cold. I should have known. Marcus said you probably couldn't help. You talked to Marcus about this. Of course I did. He's my brother. And he said that if you really loved us, you'd find a way. But I guess you have other priorities now. Catherine, that's not fair. I've given you everything I have. I'm just asking for a little time to. Forget it, Mom. I'll figure it out myself. Goodbye. She hung up. I tried calling back, but she didn't answer. I tried Marcus next, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left messages. I sent emails. I reached out on social media. Nothing. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The silence was deafening. I told myself there had to be an explanation. They were busy with their new lives. They were adjusting to their careers. They'd come around. But they didn't. And then, one cold October evening, I got a registered letter. The envelope was thick, official, intimidating. Inside was a legal document that made my blood run cold. Wellington versus Wellington. Complaint for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. I read it 3 times before my brain could process what I was seeing. My children were suing me. Marcus and Catherine, represented by a high-powered law firm I could never afford, were claiming that I had systematically defrauded and manipulated them throughout their childhood. They alleged that I had used their father's death to gain undue control over family assets. That I had misappropriated funds meant for their education and future. That I had emotionally manipulated them into believing I was a sacrificial, loving mother when in reality I was a calculating, greedy woman who used her children as a means to an end. The lawsuit demanded repayment of $450,000, the approximate total of what I'd spent on their education and living expenses over the years, plus damages for emotional distress and lost opportunities. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words on the page blurred as tears streamed down my face. How could they? How could my own children, the babies I'd held in my arms, the little ones I'd read bedtime stories to, the teenagers I'd stayed up worrying about, how could they do this to me? Called Marcus immediately. This time he answered. Marcus, what is this? What are you doing? His voice was cold, businesslike. Nothing like the boy who used to call me Mama and beg for one more story before bed. Mom, this isn't personal. It's just business. Business. You're suing your own mother for raising you. You need to understand something. His tone was infuriatingly calm. Grandmother Wellington has helped me see things clearly. You manipulated us. You made us feel guilty our entire lives, like we owed you something. You used Dad's death to control us. I loved you. I gave you everything. You gave us guilt, Mom. You gave us shame. Do you know how embarrassing it was, having friends come over to our rundown apartment, wearing clothes from Goodwill while other kids had new things? You could have asked the Wellington family for help, but you were too proud. They cut us off. They wanted nothing to do with us. Because you weren't good enough for them. You've never been good enough. And you made sure we paid the price for your inadequacy. The words were like physical blows. Marcus, this is your grandmother talking. This isn't you. She's poisoned you against me. No, Mum. She's opened my eyes. Catherine and I have both realized what you did to us. We deserve compensation for the childhood you stole from us. I gave you a childhood. I gave you love. You gave us poverty. There's a difference. My lawyer will be in touch. He hung up. I sank to the floor, the phone still clutched in my hand, and sobbed until I had nothing left. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Not a good one anyway. I ended up with a public defender named James Morrison, a kind-faced man in his 40s who looked almost as tired as I felt. Mrs. Wellington, I'm going to be honest with you, he said during our first meeting, papers spread across his desk. This case is unusual. Typically, Adult children don't sue their parents for childhood expenses unless there's evidence of actual fraud or abuse. There wasn't any fraud or abuse. I loved them. I took care of them. I believe you. But here's the problem. They have an extremely expensive legal team, and they're building a narrative. They're going to paint you as manipulative and controlling. They're going to twist every sacrifice you made into evidence of emotional abuse. How can they do that? James sighed. Money buys creative lawyers, Mrs. Wellington. And from what I can tell, someone with deep pockets is funding this lawsuit. Victoria Wellington, I said bitterly. My late husband's mother. She always hated me. Now she's turned my children against me. That's my suspicion too. But we need evidence. And we need to prepare you for what's coming. They're going to dig into your finances, your past, everything. They're going to try to prove you were irresponsible or negligent. I worked 3 jobs to support them, which they'll characterize as you being so desperate for money that you emotionally manipulated your children. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wellington, but this is going to get ugly. He wasn't wrong. Over the next 6 months, I was deposed, investigated, and humiliated. They demanded records of every penny I'd ever spent. They interviewed my old neighbors, my former co-workers, Marcus and Catherine's childhood friends. They twisted every memory, every moment, every sacrifice into evidence against me. The breaking point came when they subpoenaed my medical records. I'd had a bout with depression after Robert died. What widow wouldn't? I'd seen a therapist for a few months, been prescribed medication, worked through my grief. It had been a dark time, but I'd gotten through it for my children's sake. Now Marcus's lawyers were using those records to paint me as mentally unstable, claiming I'd been unfit to parent, and had damaged her children through her untreated mental illness. I wanted to give up. I wanted to let them have whatever they wanted, let them take whatever was left, just to make it stop. But James Morrison wouldn't let me. Mrs. Wellington listened to me, he said one afternoon, when I told him I was ready to settle. I've been doing some digging, and I found something interesting. He pulled out a folder, spreading documents across his desk. Do you know anything about a trust fund set up by your late husband's family? I shook my head. Robert's family cut us off after his firm collapsed. They never gave us anything. That's what they wanted you to think. But according to these documents, Robert's father, Marcus Wellington Sr., set up substantial trust funds for both of your children before he died. The funds were controlled by Victoria Wellington as trustee, to be released when each child turned 25. My heart started racing. How much? $2 million. Each. The room spun. What? Marcus turned 25 3 years ago. Catherine turned 25 last year. They've both received their inheritances. Your children are millionaires, Mrs. Wellington. And they're suing you for $450,000. I couldn't speak. Couldn't process what I was hearing. But here's the truly interesting part, James continued. According to the trust documents, there was one condition. The funds would only be released if Victoria Wellington determined that the children had overcome the negative influence of their unsuitable mother. She's been planning this, I whispered. She's been turning them against me so they could get their money. That's what it looks like. And there's more. I found communications between Victoria Wellington and your children's lawyers. She's funding the lawsuit against you. The whole thing is a setup. But why? They already have their money. Why are they still coming after me? James's expression was grim. Because Victoria Wellington doesn't just want to separate you from your children financially. She wants to destroy you completely. And I suspect there's something else you don't know about. He was right. 3 days later, James called me with more devastating news. Mrs. Wellington, do you own your home? No, I rent an apartment. I never could afford to buy a house. Not after paying for the children's education. Are you sure? Because I found a property deed with your name on it. That's impossible. I never bought. Then it hit me. A memory from 20 years ago. Fuzzy with time and exhaustion. Robert's father had died shortly after Robert did. I'd been drowning in grief and bills, working multiple jobs, barely sleeping. Victoria had contacted me once, the only time she'd reached out in years, to say that Marcus Sr. had left something for the grandchildren in his will. She'd sent papers for me to sign. Documents that she said were setting up trusts for Marcus and Catherine's education. I'd been so grateful, so overwhelmed. I'd signed them without reading them carefully. "Oh God," I whispered into the phone. "What is it?" "I signed something. Years ago." Victoria told me it was for the children's education trusts. Mrs. Wellington, one of those documents was a property deed. Marcus Wellington Sr. owned a house in upstate New York, a large colonial on 10 acres of land. According to the deed, he left it to you, with the stipulation that it would pass to your children upon your death. I don't understand. I never knew about any house. Because Victoria Wellington has been managing it. She's been collecting rent from tenants for the past 20 years. And she's been depositing that rent money, approximately $3,000 per month, into an account she controls. The numbers made my head spin. 20 years, $3,000 a month. That was over $700,000. That money should have been yours, James said. You own the house. You should have been receiving that income all along. Victoria Wellington has been embezzling from you for 2 decades. Can we prove it? I've got the bank records. And I've got something even better. Emails between Victoria and your children, discussing the property. They all know about it, Mrs. Wellington. They all know the house is yours, they all know about the rental income. And they're working together to make sure you never find out. Why? Why would they do this? Because, James said quietly. According to these emails, if you discovered the property and started asking questions, their whole scheme would fall apart. They need you to stay poor, stay vulnerable, stay out of the way. And this lawsuit, it's designed to keep you so busy defending yourself that you never have time to look into your own assets. I felt like I was falling into a dark hole with no bottom. My children, my babies, had conspired with their grandmother to steal from me, to destroy me. What do we do? Yes. We fight back, James said. And we start by filing a countersuit. James Morrison might have been a public defender, but he worked like a man possessed. Within 2 weeks, we'd filed our own lawsuit. Margaret Wellington versus Victoria Wellington, Marcus Wellington, and Catherine Wellington. Fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The allegations were devastating and meticulously documented. Victoria Wellington had fraudulently concealed the property deed and stolen rental income for 20 years. Marcus and Catherine had knowingly participated in the conspiracy once they came of age. All 3 defendants had launched a fraudulent lawsuit designed to harass and intimidate me into silence. They had engaged in elder abuse by attempting to financially exploit a vulnerable 70-year-old woman. The countersuit demanded the return of all stolen rental income, plus damages, plus legal fees. The day we filed, my phone rang off the hook. First Catherine, screaming that I was a vindictive witch trying to ruin her life. Then Marcus, coldly threatening that I'd regret going to war with the Wellington family. Then Victoria herself, her voice dripping with venom, promising to destroy whatever pathetic life I had left. I hung up on all of them. Let them rage. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. Felt anger. Clean, righteous anger. They had underestimated me. They'd thought I was just a weak old woman, too tired and too poor to fight back. They'd forgotten that I'd survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of back-breaking work. They'd forgotten that I was tougher than I looked. They were about to remember. The legal battle that followed was brutal. Depositions, motions, discovery requests. It consumed every moment of my life. But James was relentless, and slowly we started winning. We proved that Victoria had been embezzling the rental income. We proved that Marcus and Catherine had known about it. We proved that their lawsuit against me was fraudulent and malicious. The judge was not pleased with the defendants. This court, he said during one hearing, his voice stern, does not look kindly on adult children who prey upon their elderly parents. Nor do we tolerate conspiracies to defraud. Victoria's expensive lawyers scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. And then came the settlement negotiations. Victoria, Marcus, and Catherine wanted to make it all go away quietly. They offered to drop their lawsuit if I dropped mine. They'd pay me $100,000 and we'd all walk away. Absolutely not, I told James. I want everything I'm owed. Every penny. And I want them to admit what they did. Mrs. Wellington, I need to warn you. If we go to trial, this will be public. Your family's dirty laundry will be in the newspapers. Are you sure you want that? I thought about all the times I'd stayed silent to keep the peace. All the times I'd swallowed my pride, accepted their neglect, made excuses for their cruelty. Yes, I said firmly. I want the truth to come out. All of it. So we went to trial. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. The Wellington family scandal had made headlines. Grandmother and adult children accused of stealing from elderly mother. $1 million trust fund beneficiaries sue mother for poverty. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded, watching as Victoria, Marcus, and Catherine entered with their legal team. Victoria looked imperious as ever, Marcus coldly professional, Catherine carefully composed. They didn't look at me. I felt nothing for them. No love, no hatred. Just a distant sadness for what might have been. James called me to the stand first. Mrs. Wellington, he said gently, please tell the court about your relationship with your children. So I did. I told them everything. The double shifts, the sacrifices, the love I'd poured into raising Marcus and Catherine. I told them about Robert's death, about being cut off by the Wellington family, about working myself to exhaustion to give my children opportunities. I cried on the stand. Not from sadness, but from exhaustion. From decades of trying to be enough, do enough, give enough. Then Victoria's lawyer cross-examined me. Mrs. Wellington, isn't it true that you were financially irresponsible? That you could have asked the Wellington family for help but chose not to out of pride? I asked for help, I said calmly. Victoria Wellington told me I wasn't worthy of the family name and that my children would be better off without my influence. Isn't it true that you suffered from depression and were prescribed psychiatric medication? Yes. After my husband died, I grieved. Like any normal person would. And isn't it true that you have always resented your children's success? I looked directly at the lawyer. I have never resented my children for anything. I resent that they allowed themselves to be turned against me by a woman who valued money more than family. But my children's success. That was my proudest achievement. Or it was, until they decided to sue me for raising them. The courtroom murmured. Then it was Victoria's turn on the stand. James was surgical in his questioning. He produced email after email, document after document, showing Victoria's systematic embezzlement. He showed how she'd manipulated the trust fund conditions to turn Marcus and Catherine against me. He demonstrated how she'd orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Mrs. Wellington, James said, why did you hate Margaret so much that you spent 20 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to destroy her? Victoria's mask of composure cracked. Because she was never good enough for my son. She dragged him down, destroyed his career, his reputation. Your son's career was destroyed by his firm's illegal activities, was it not? She made him weak. By supporting him. By working to provide for her family when he couldn't. By making him a laughingstock. The Wellingtons are better than that. We deserved better than her. So you stole from her. You manipulated her children against her. You tried to leave her penniless and alone. I did what was necessary to protect my family's legacy. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. Marcus and Catherine took the stand next. Their testimony was halting, defensive. James methodically showed how they'd known about the property, known about the rental income, known their lawsuit was fraudulent. Mr. Wellington, James said to Marcus, when did you first learn that your mother owned valuable property? I Grandmother told me when I turned 25. The same time you received your $2 million inheritance. Yes. And did you think to inform your mother that she owned this property? Silence. Mr. Wellington. Grandmother said it was better if she didn't know. That mom would just waste the money anyway. So you participated in stealing from your mother because you believed she didn't deserve her own property? It wasn't like that. What was it like? Marcus finally looked at me. For just a moment I saw something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by cold justification. She made our childhood miserable. We deserved compensation. You deserved compensation, James repeated slowly. So you stole $750,000 from your 70-year-old mother who worked herself to exhaustion to put you through Harvard? Marcus didn't answer. Catherine's testimony was even worse. She cried on the stand, claiming she'd been manipulated by Victoria, that she hadn't understood what was happening. But James produced emails she'd written, laughing about how clueless I was, joking about how easy it would be to keep me in the dark. This one's particularly interesting, James said, displaying an email on the courtroom screen. It's from Catherine to Marcus, dated 6 months before they filed their lawsuit. Let me read it. Grandmother is right. If we hit Mom with enough legal bills, she'll be too broke and too scared to start digging. By the time this is over, she'll have nothing, and we'll finally be free of her. The guilt trips, the manipulation, all of it, done. And we'll have what we're owed. Catherine sobbed. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, Miss Wellington? I was angry. She always made us feel so guilty, like we could never do enough for her. Because she sacrificed everything for you. Because she never let us forget it. The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling. So let me make sure I understand, James said quietly. Your mother worked 70-hour weeks to send you to art school in Paris. She went into debt to give you opportunities. She loved you and supported you your entire life. And because she wanted you to appreciate those sacrifices, you decided she deserved to die poor and alone. Catherine couldn't answer through her tears. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. In the matter of Wellington versus Wellington, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Margaret Wellington, on all counts. I closed my eyes as the verdict was read. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of embezzlement. Guilty of elder abuse. Guilty of conspiracy. The judgment was staggering. Victoria, Marcus, and Catherine were ordered to return all stolen rental income, $720,000 plus interest, along with damages for emotional distress, $500,000, and punitive damages, $1 million. They were also ordered to pay all my legal fees. Total, over $2.5 million. Additionally, the judge ordered that I was to retain full ownership of the upstate property, and that Victoria was to be permanently barred from any contact with me or control over any asset related to me. Victoria was ashen. Marcus stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Catherine wept openly. Felt nothing. Just a hollow emptiness where love used to be. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. James gave a brief statement, but I waved them off. I had nothing to say to the media. This wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about justice. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat with the judgment papers and finally allowed myself to cry. Not from happiness but from grief. Because no amount of money could give me back what I'd really lost. My children. I'd won the battle. But I'd lost my family. Or so I thought. 3 years passed. I used the settlement money to move into a comfortable apartment with a view of the city park. I visited the upstate property for the first time, a beautiful colonial house with gardens and old trees, and decided to keep it, though I hired a property manager to handle the rentals. I donated a significant portion of the settlement to nursing scholarships for underprivileged students. I saw a therapist to work through the trauma and grief. I joined a book club. I made friends. Real friends who valued me for myself and not for what I could give them. I tried to move on. I never heard from Marcus or Catherine. Occasionally, I'd see their names in the society pages. Marcus making deals in the financial world, Catherine having gallery showings in Manhattan. They were thriving, it seemed, even after the lawsuit. Victoria had retreated from public life entirely. Rumor had it she'd moved to her estate in Connecticut to avoid the scandal. I tried not to think about any of them. Then, 3 years after the trial, the wedding invitation arrived. I've already told you about that invitation, about the cold, impersonal note assigning me to table 42 near the service entrance. What I haven't told you yet is what I did next. Called James Morrison. James, I need your advice. Mrs. Wellington, good to hear from you. What's going on? I explained about the invitation, about the seat assignment, about the clear attempt to hide me away at my own son's wedding. Don't go, James said immediately. Why put yourself through that? Because he's still my son, I said quietly. And maybe this is an olive branch. Maybe he wants me there, even if he's too proud to say so. Or maybe it's another humiliation. Margaret, you don't owe him anything. I know. But I need to try one more time. If he rejects me to my face at his own wedding, then I'll know it's truly over. I can finally let go. James sighed. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. If you're going to do this, at least let me come with you. I laughed despite myself. To my son's wedding. As your lawyer and your friend. You shouldn't face this alone. And that's when the plan began to form. The invitation said nothing about bringing a guest, but I didn't care. I called the RSVP number and informed them, in my sweetest voice, that Mrs. Margaret Wellington would be attending with a companion. The woman on the other end sounded flustered. I'm sorry, ma'am, but your invitation is for one guest only. How strange, I said mildly. My son must have forgotten to include a +1 for his mother. I'm sure he won't mind if I bring a friend. After all, it would be so lonely sitting at table 42 all by myself. There was a long pause. I'll have to check with the bride and groom. You do that, dear. And please tell Marcus that his mother called. I hung up before she could respond. An hour later my phone rang. It was Catherine. Mom. Her voice was tight. What are you doing? Hello, Catherine. How lovely to hear from you. It's been 3 years. You can't bring someone to the wedding. Why not? Surely there's room for one more person. Thanks for watching our part 1. Please subscribe and comment. Wait for part 2.